The sign on the wall says, we say welcome to everybody. We are glad that you're here, those here in the auditorium and those who are watching online. We're here to study about Jesus. We're looking at the book of John. It's up close with Jesus via the disciple whom he loved. Before we do that, let me remind you real quickly of our online Bible classes that we offer. Monday through Friday, it's Bible investigation every night at 9 o'clock. Every Saturday morning, it's at 9 o'clock, it's Matthew, the arrival of the King. Free study guide are available back by the fake palm tree in the rear of the auditorium, or you can have it emailed to you every week. On Wednesday, we're looking at Philippians. In fact, this coming Wednesday will be our last study of the book of Philippians. Once again, a free study guide is back in the back because that class is going to be replaced. We were studying the book of Acts in here in the auditorium on Wednesday nights. We stopped studying that. We did not finish it. Well, we're going to finish it now. We're going to finish it online. Once again, you can get your study guides. Remember your notebooks. You can get your study guides back by the back, or you can have it emailed to you. That starts October the 8th. We will complete our study of the book of Acts. Every Sunday night, it's Sunday Nights with Michael. We're looking at some of the top questions that have been asked of me in the past 49 years. Tonight we finish up. Why do I need to repent? If I'm good, if I'm morally good, why do I need to repent? That's part 2 coming up tonight. Every day, 7 days a week, we have 2 minutes for encouragement, which is just encouragement from God's Word, a Bible passage every day. That is a good front door into maybe something more significant, perhaps a Bible study, because this is just an uplifting, positive Bible passage that is shared daily. If that is the front door, here is the back door. 2 minutes to a better family life. This is just family and marriage tips. I don't actually read the Bible. These tips are based on biblical principles. But this is a good way if someone you have in your family or maybe your circle of friends who is kind of anti-Bible, anti-church, this is a good way to get them interested in the Bible again. This year, our elders are emphasizing Bible passages that reminds us of the need to share our faith. This week, Ephesians 2, verses 8 and 9. Now, it's up close with Jesus via the disciple whom he loved. Study guides for Lesson 24 are back in the back by the 2 exit doors. We're looking at Jesus goes to the Feast of Tabernacles. John chapter 7, verse 1. After these things, what things, John? Well, the things that happen in John chapter 6. After the feeding of the 5,000, after the talking about I am the bread of life, after talking about eating his body and drinking his blood, after some of the disciples, many of them leaving Jesus, now he turns to the next story. Chapter 6 takes place in the spring. Chapter 6 takes place late March, early April, most likely of 29 A.D. The events of chapter 7 are going to happen in the fall, roughly 6 months later. We're talking about somewhere around September of 29. So John skipped 6 months in his storyline. He's going to leave Galilee. Jesus will no longer spend any extended time in Galilee. He will end up spending his time in Judea, traveling to Judea, and to the very east on the other side of the Jordan from Judea. After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee. This is his last time in Galilee. For why? Why is he still up in the Galilee? For he did not want to walk in Judea, because the Jews, now when you see the word Jews, it could mean Jewish people in general, or it could mean the Jewish leadership, primarily in Jerusalem. We're talking about the Sanhedrin. Here, we're talking about the Sanhedrin, because the Jews sought to kill him. Ever since he had healed that man by the pool on a Sabbath, ever since he had claimed God as his father, the Jewish leadership had wanted to get rid of him. Jesus knows this. Jesus also knows when he wants to be betrayed. He knows when he wants to die on the cross. He is the master of his timeline. So Jesus, to control the timeline, stays up in Galilee for a while. But he's going to go back to Judea. Now the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles was at hand. Now in a moment we're going to talk about what the Feast of Tabernacles was all about. The Feast of Tabernacles signified many different things. One of the things it signified was the fact that God had chosen to tabernacle or to live with his people. He had come down in the tabernacle. His presence was there. Later, his presence would be in the temple. And the Jewish people celebrated that fact. But guess what? Jesus is even closer. Jesus is God tabernacling with them on an individual basis. It's God coming down to earth in a earthly human form. His brothers, this would be James, this would be Jude, this would be Joseph or Joseph, this would be Simon. Those are the ones that we know of by name. His brothers speak up. His brothers therefore said to him, "Depart from here. Why are you up here? You know, this is not the prime spot. If you want to be the Messiah, it's going to be tough being the Messiah up in Galilee. Go down to Judea. That's the prime spot. That's where people will notice you. Depart from here and go into Judea, that your disciples." In a moment, we're going to go back to the book of Genesis. And we're going to see very similar terminology. That your disciples also may see the works that you are doing. In fact, let's just pause here for a moment. Let's pause in the reading and let's read that passage in Genesis. Genesis chapter 37. It's interesting when you read the Septuagint translation of the Old Testament. In the first century, If anybody of any common people, if anybody had a copy of some of the writings of the Old Testament, they probably had it in the Septuagint translation. There would be more copies of that available than in Hebrew. It's a translation that the common people were very well familiar with. Notice here in Genesis 37, look at verse 19. Then they, that's the brothers of Joseph, when they see Joseph coming, then they said to one another, look, this dreamer is coming. What I find interesting is some of the same Greek words and phrases that's used regarding Joseph's brothers and Joseph is used right here between Jesus and his brothers. The brothers of Jesus at this point do not believe in their older brother. They had, it seemed like, followed him to Capernaum. We guess, this is a guess, we guess that their father, Joseph, is deceased. If the father is deceased, then the oldest son becomes the patriarchal leader of the family. So he moved the family to Capernaum. The brothers, John chapter 2, follow him to Capernaum. But they don't believe in him. They don't believe. Even though he has been doing these miracles, they still don't believe. Verse 4, for no one does anything in secret while he himself seeks to be known openly. Up here, you're kind of in secret. The Sanhedrin are down in Jerusalem. They're the ones that you need to convince. And you're up here in Galilee. If you do these things, they don't believe. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. For even his brothers did not believe in him. Then Jesus said to them, my time has not yet come. In a few moments, we're going to talk about his time. But your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you because you are the world. You're just like the world. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify of it that its works are evil. You go up to this feast. I am not yet, circle that word yet, going up to this feast. For my time, once again, circle that word my time, we're coming back to it, has not yet fully come. When he said these things to them, he remained in Galilee. Let's take a closer look here. Instead of choosing the most direct route between places, Jesus often determined his route by whom he wanted to see. Remember, he wanted to see that woman at the well, or whom he wanted to avoid. Right here, he wants to avoid the spotlight of the Sanhedrin, for at least for the moment. He's not ready to be arrested. He's not ready to die yet. He still has approximately 6 months of training to do with his disciples. In this case, he was avoiding the Jewish leaders who wanted to kill him. As I said, ever since Jesus had healed that paralyzed man, the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem had sought to kill him. In many ways, this reminds me of Daniel. Daniel stood up for what was right. He was thrown to the lions. The brothers, they want to throw Jesus to the lions. Just go down there to Judea. Prove yourself. Jesus is the master of the timeline. He will be betrayed. He will show himself. He will be betrayed, but not for another 6 months. The Feast of Tabernacles, let's talk about that. It was also called the Feast of Booths because this reminded the Jewish people of when they lived in little booths or tents in the wilderness. It was called the Feast of Ingathering. This is the feast that happens in the fall during harvest time. It's called the Feast of Harvest, and it's also called the Season of Joy. Turn with me real quickly to Deuteronomy 16. Deuteronomy chapter 16. Let's back it up to verse 13. You shall observe the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days. It was a 7-day feast with an additional ceremonial day tacked on, the 8th day, tacked on to the end. You shall observe the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days, when you have gathered from your threshing floor and from your winepress, and you shall rejoice. A season of joy. You shall rejoice in your feast, you and your son and your daughter, your male servant, your female servants, and the Levites and the strangers and the fatherless and the widows who are within your gates. It was called the season of joy, celebrating the harvest that God had given them. The feast is a week-long celebration, as I mentioned, with a special 8th day added on at the end. Turn with me to Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus chapter 23. Let's begin in verse 34. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, the 15th day of the 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days to the Lord. On the first day there shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it. For 7 days you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. On the 8th day, there's your special add-on day. On the 8th day, you shall have a holy convocation, and you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. It is a sacred assembly, and you shall do no customary work on it. The Feast of Tabernacles was one of the 3 big feasts. The first one was Passover, and remember, Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread coincided together. Then you had the Feast of Weeks, we call it Pentecost. Then you had the Feast of Tabernacles. The feast commemorated the journey through the wilderness and celebrated the harvest that God gives his people. As I said, the feast is the 3rd great annual pilgrimage festival. You were supposed to attend. Who was supposed to attend? Every male of age. We're talking about age approximately 13 and up. Now the Jewish people had interpreted that command. Well, what did God mean by every male? The Jews up in Galilee, they're the furthest from Jerusalem. You know, to travel from Galilee down to Jerusalem, if you had a family, you're talking about close to a week travel, 1 week of walking or riding on a donkey. And then you're going to talk about a week going back to Galilee. You're probably not surprised that the Jews in Galilee said, well, that's only for those Jews who live close to Jerusalem. Okay? So the Jews in Galilee had their interpretation of who should go up for the feast. Now, they would still celebrate it, but they would celebrate it locally, where they lived. They would not travel to Jerusalem. Now, the Jews in Jerusalem, they said no. God said every male, he meant every male. Now, there was an economic reason for their interpretation. The more people who came to Jerusalem meant more money to the temple, to area merchants, to people who lived there in Jerusalem. So it was an economic boom to host the feast days. So the Jews in Jerusalem said, no, you all need to come here. So there was a different interpretation of who should actually attend this feast. The feast took place in the fall. It would be our very late September and also early October. It began on the 15th day of the 7th month. Thus, if you go back on your calendar, you'll notice it started 5 days after the Day of Atonement, and it would start 15 days after the Jewish New Year. So why? Let's ask some questions. Why did Jesus stay away from Judea? Because the Jews, that would be the Jewish leadership, sought to kill him. But it's more than that. He's not afraid of the Jewish leadership. It's not like, oh no, I'm going to die if I go to Jerusalem. Because he does end up going to Jerusalem. And he does end up teaching in Jerusalem. He is delaying, he's staying away because he needs time to train his disciples. Plus, to fulfill prophecy. Prophecies like that he would be the perfect Passover lamb. Prophecies like he would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. Prophecies like he would be betrayed and hung on a cross between thieves. So Jesus, it's more than just fear, because he really didn't fear the Jewish leadership. He needs to train his disciples. What feast was near? The Feast of Tabernacles. Now, let's look for just a moment at God's providential will. 3 big feasts that Jewish males were supposed to attend: Passover, Pentecost, Feast of Tabernacles. Which one, think about what happens on one particular Pentecost, which one of those 3 was most attended? Anyone want to guess? What? Passover was the most popular. It was most popular. Unfortunately, it happened in the spring. And if you lived away from Jerusalem, you very likely would end up having to travel on the Mediterranean Sea. And the Mediterranean Sea, in late March and early April, that travel can be very treacherous. On top of that, rainy season. When's the rainy season? It happens during Passover. So if you're traveling on foot or you're traveling by donkey, once again, you're going to have to go through the elements. It may be raining on you. So even though Passover was by far the most popular, It was the one that the Jewish people loved because it had the best meal. The Passover meal was pretty spectacular, okay? I'll just say it like that. The Passover meal was pretty spectacular. It was a great meal, very emotional, very much something that the Jewish people loved. But the Passover event, the Passover festival, was not the most attended. Which one do you think was the most attended? God's providential will come into play here. You got two more guesses. Pentecost. Why would God want Pentecost to be the most attended? Because that's when he's going to start his church. Hey, that's when he's going to start his church. He's going to have the biggest crowd in Jerusalem for Pentecost. And that's when he's going to start his church. Passover, most popular by far. Feast of Tabernacles, the people liked it because that was the Feast of Harvest, and there was a lot of drinking involved with the Feast of Tabernacles, okay? They enjoyed that one. But the Feast of Pentecost happened during the easiest time to travel. It happened during the dry season. It happened while the crops were laid by. Crops were already laid by that time. You don't have to be worried about your crops. And it made it more convenient for the people to attend. This is God's providential will. I'm going to give Peter and the other apostles the biggest crowd possible by having Pentecost at the most convenient time to travel. So, let's go back to John 7. The Feast of Tabernacles is close by, near. Why? What did his brothers tell him and why? Depart from here and go into Judea. Why are they saying that? Hey, if you're going to be the Messiah, if you are who you say you are, it's time either to fish or cut bait. It's time to do it or stop talking about it. Just go down there, prove yourself if you can. You see, this is a challenge also because the brothers don't believe. Which brothers ended up believing? Well, of the four that we have named, at least James and Jude, and perhaps more, believe. Go with me to Acts 1. Acts chapter 1. Acts chapter 1, verse 14. These all continued with one accord in prayer and supplication with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. To be brothers means it has to be how many? At least two. James, the guy who wrote the book of James, we believe that he was the earthly brother of Jesus. Jude, we also believe that he was an earthly brother of Jesus. I'm going to guess, and Wendell, this is a guess. I'm going to guess that Simon and Joses, the other two brothers, also believed. I mean, when you've got your own older brother that you know died on the cross, no doubt about it, and he comes up out of the grave, walking and talking, That is a big miracle. I'm guessing that all four brothers believed in Jesus eventually. What did Jesus mean? Okay, we've got a question here. I love questions. Tom, what's your question?
What about his sisters?
Okay. It says, if you look at Mark, Mark is the one that tells us the names of the brothers. In their culture, it was not, ladies, I'm sorry, it was not common to mention the names of your women in the family. Okay, I'm sorry, but that was their culture. But it says that he had sisters. That means, once again, at least two. I'm going to go and say the same thing about the sisters. If my older brother clearly died on a Roman cross, and there's no doubt about it, you did not survive a Roman cross. If my older brother died on a Roman cross and then was resurrected, and he's alive again, walking and talking, I think the sisters also believed. You know, it's hard to turn down cold, hard facts. Keep in mind, if Joseph the father did die, and as we've said before, it was common for a man to be sometimes as much as double the age of his bride. If Mary was, say, 13 or 14 or whatever when she got married, Joseph could have been 25, 30, 35 years old. Men at that time, it's hard work. Men did not have long lifespans. When Joseph died, it was the physical responsibility of the oldest son to manage and care for the family. The younger siblings would have been brought up with Jesus as not just their older brother, but in some ways, Jesus was like a father image to them. So I think in my heart that all the brothers and all the sisters believe. Now, can I prove that? No, I can't prove that. That's just an opinion of mine. Let's go to our next question. Now, here's the big question. What did Jesus mean by "my time has not yet come"? We need to really understand this part of John 7. Because as a little boy, it seems to me that Jesus lied. Okay? I'm just a little guy. I read this story and I think, you know, he said he wasn't going, then he goes. Oh, Jesus, that's kind of fibbing, isn't it? No, it's not. We need to look at the Greek. This phrase, especially the word time, this is not the same word as in John 2, verse 4. Let's go back to John 2. Go back to John 2, verse number 4. This is the miracle of turning the water into wine. Jesus says to Mary, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." That word hour is hora. This word time here in John 7 is kairos. Kairos means appointed time. What is Jesus saying? Jesus is saying, I'm going to follow the Father's appointed time. Today is not the day for me to go. Because, why? if we look at how the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles was observed, and we're going to notice when he does arrive, about halfway through the feast, he's going to get up and do what? He's going to teach. Why does he take the time? Why does he choose the middle? Well, there's a reason why he chose the middle. The Jewish Sanhedrin had a lot of, let's just call them duties. Had a lot of duties to perform during the Feast of Tabernacles, especially from the middle part to the end. Other words, they're going to notice as much. They don't have time to go out and be looking for Jesus because at the first, they don't have a lot of responsibilities. But beginning in the middle of the festival, the Jewish Sanhedrin would have a lot of duties or things that they had to perform or do. So they don't have time to be watching out for Jesus. Jesus skips the time when scrutiny would be at the peak. Does that make sense? Yeah. We don't want to be arrested yet. We don't want to be crucified yet. So he goes to the feast kind of in secret, and he stands up and starts teaching, but it's not until the middle and the latter part of the festival. In other words, this is the time that he could teach without being under intense scrutiny. Now, he's still going to have some Jewish leaders. He's still going to interact with some Jewish leaders, but probably not the higher part of the Jewish leadership. Okay? So he will interact when he does speak up, but it's not going to be with probably the upper tier of the Jewish leadership. Question.
The word hora, is that about the miracles?
No, hora, the word hora, it means hour. And the word hora is referring to his crucifixion. It's not time for me to be crucified. When he says time here, when it's translated as time, it's the appointed time. Jesus is doing the will of his Father. And he's going to follow his Father's appointed time strictly right here. Let's continue on. Here's a personal question. How would you feel? How would you feel if a family member or friend doubted you or your abilities? Let's not fail to look at Jesus as human, because he's 100% divine, he's 100% human. So how would you feel? Let me go to Ed. Let me go to Charlie, to Penny, to Nathan. One of you, think about this. How would you feel personally if a family member or friend doubted you or your abilities? Anyone? Penny.
It would hurt. It would also doubt myself.
It would hurt. It would hurt greatly. It would hurt intensely. We can't just read these words without feeling the hurt. Jesus knew how his brothers felt about him. That had to hurt. You know, he just went through, just 6 months earlier, he saw a bunch of disciples, followers, leave. That hurt. In my mind, as I picture the people leaving, I can see maybe a tear coming down his cheek. Here, it's almost the same thing. The people that knew him best, the people had grown up around him for about 30 years, close to 30 years, doubted him. That had to hurt. That had to hurt. So how did Jesus respond? My time has not yet come. The world cannot hate you. Why? Because you are the world. You are the world. But the world hates me. Why? Because I testify of it that its works are evil. You go up to, actually what he says, I mistyped there, to this feast. I am not yet going up to this feast. You know, it's kind of, to me, it's kind of interesting that this feast commemorated God tabernacling with his people, and here Jesus is the true God, and he's living, tabernacling with his people. Was this a lie? No, it was not a lie. 8-year-old Michael thought it was a lie. 8-year-old Michael was wrong, okay? Because you look at what he said. He said exactly what he meant. I'm not going up yet. The time, my appointed time, is not today. It was not a lie. Why did Jesus say the world hated him? Because he testified of it that its works are evil. This is the first time in the book of John that the world is pictured as the enemy of God. Up to this point, that was not the case. John 3:16, for God so loved the world. The world represents the lost masses. It represents people that should come and some would come to know God. But here, Jesus is using this word to refer to the enemies of God. So what? Practical applications for living for Jesus 24/7. Let me give you two. Like Jesus, always respond truthfully, even when it hurts. Respond truthfully, even when it hurts. As I said, I can see that tear coming down his cheek. I can see the emotion in his words. This hurt, but he responded truthfully. Number two, the world will oppose you. If the world doesn't oppose you, then look at yourself, because you may be more in the world than you think. If you, from day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, if you don't see and feel some opposition from the world, you may be more like the world than you want to say you are. We've got to be different. Ed. Yeah, we do get defensive. You know, Jesus is that perfect model. You know, Jesus could stand up for what is right. Jesus could oppose the world as he always did. He opposed evil. at the same time, you could feel his love for you. Thank you so much. We got 5 minutes. If you got a question, you can text it in. You know, Jesus had that special ability where he could oppose you. He could oppose you at the same time. You knew he loved you. You know, we've got to hate sin. Ed, we've got to hate sin, but we've got to love the sinner. And that is tough, isn't it? It's tough. It's tough because so often we connect the two. We connect the sin to the sinner, and we just kind of throw them all out. We kind of throw away the baby with the wash water, out the door, out the window. But we can't do that. We got to make sure that the world knows where we stand, but the world must also see us as loving. That's the problem we have in today's world. That's a problem we have in today's world. Let's look and see if we have any questions. And I do not have any questions at all. We will, Lord willing, resume right there. We'll be looking at verse number 10. And Jesus actually does go to the Feast of Tabernacles. Thank you so much. Class is dismissed. Appreciate you all. Thank you.